Today I was on an airplane and I flew from my home state back to the state that I go to college in, and I decided in that flight it was the perfect amount of time to watch both Mean Girls movies back to back, as you do. I decided to start with the 2024 movie, mostly because the songs get stuck in my head really easily, so I figured that if I watched the 2004 one second, that I wouldn't get songs stuck in my head as easily. This was a lie, but I had a good time doing it this way, so I wonder if there would be a difference in how it would feel if I watched them in different orders, or if I would notice different things. I wanna try that out, but now is not the time. I've already seen Mean Girls twice today, technically. Within the first couple of minutes of Mean Girls 2024, I started thinking about the cinematography, specifically the aspect ratio. And if you don't know, the aspect ratio is the way in which the image appears on a screen. So for example, the video you're watching right now is a 16:9 aspect ratio. However, I record this on photo booth on my computer, which means that while I'm recording, the aspect ratio is closer to a 4:3. I'm not actually sure what the photo booth aspect ratio is, but it's a lot more square. This is the aspect ratio that I film in, whereas this is the aspect ratio that you're seeing the video in. A complaint that a lot of people had when the 2024 Mean Girls movie came out was the fact that people didn't like that it started off as a phone, and they also had issues with sexy for, being in the aspect ratio of a phone. I think that it's perfectly fine. If I had to watch an entire movie in a 9:16 aspect ratio, or just any vertical aspect ratio, I'd get pretty annoyed. I think that the most vertical you can get is to have a 1:1, which is a completely perfect square aspect ratio. However, I think that as a touch for movies, it can be very interesting. And what I particularly like about Mean Girls 2024 in their aspect ratio is the fact that they started off like this, and then as the garage door opens, it turns into a square and then it elongates, and it's a very seamless thing. Plus, there's this gigantic one shot throughout the duration of the song, and the part of me that took a digital production film class in high school 6 years ago really is so excited about this because I love film so deeply, and I've only ever taken two classes, one that's like a production class and one that's a theory class. Fingers crossed I'm going to take a screenwriting class next semester at my college. Either way, I adore film, and if I focus on film, I get so excited. I have a favorite shot of the show Dickinson. Like those are my feelings, right? I love when TV shows have the ability to actually have interesting cinema, because as someone who usually watches sitcoms, there isn't like that much interesting cinema, especially in sitcoms. But when TV shows have the ability and they actually take this ability to do these cool things and they run with it. I had a great time today watching Mean Girls because of that. They decided that they were going to take an idea, which is the phone aspect ratio, and they were going to turn it into this like cinematic thing, and it's incredible editing. I mean, it is really cool. If you're not paying attention, you might not necessarily notice that it's happening until it's actively happening. I think that it's very difficult to implement social media and all those aspects in film, especially if you want to show like recordings from people like TikTok. And I think that's like the idea of what was going on in Mean Girls. They were like all TikToks, and one of them was like an Instagram post and all that. So I think that is definitely difficult as a thing to reckon with. But Mean Girls did it very well with the opening because they used it in a way that shows art in film by getting creative with it. Some of the things that I wanted to note about Mean Girls 2024 is for the beginning of Sexy, doing it in like all these little videos were they were a little bit overwhelming, and the plain screen started glitching out a little bit, I think, because there was so much going on it couldn't really keep up. But it is a really cool idea to do all of these things together like it's a mosaic, and I think that that is a very interesting way to do musicals and have it set in a modern setting. Once again, using the art form for what it is. If you want to get funky with it, I guess, get funky with it. Like, do stuff with aspect ratios. I think aspect ratios are so cool. I started nerding out about aspect ratios once to my girlfriend, and she was like, I don't know what that is. And I was like, she knows what aspect ratios are now, but most people don't, and they make me really excited. Furthermore, in Mean Girls 2024, the aspect ratio changes for when there's like these big musical numbers. I don't know the names of most of the songs. Like Katie's first song, that has like a thinner aspect ratio. I think it's like a 21:9 aspect ratio. That happens during the song at the party, the one where they're all shaking and it's like, so someone gets hurt. It happens some songs, not all songs, but a lot of them. And I think that's also really cool. You get that with the introduction of Regina George. And I think that's a really cool because you are using your art form, film, to tell a story. And it like narrows in on things. I mean, quite literally, it narrows in. And I think that I'm not sure exactly what could be said about it because I haven't really had that much time to think about it. But I really do think that it's something that is just so cool and so interesting. And I think that it's something that they did really well. And I love when movies change up their aspect ratios. If you watch my other video, you might have remembered me talking about what it means to be in the real versus the imaginary versus the symbolic. And a lot of musicals don't take place in the real so much because they're a musical. There are musicals do make jokes about like hearing the people singing, but for the most part, these are interactions that are symbolic or imaginary. And I think by changing the aspect ratio up, that can be really cool. Mean Girls 2004 changed the aspect ratio once, and that's to show Katie growing up in an unspecified African country. There's not a lot of like difference in aspect ratio, and that's fine. Like, it's a very normal movie. However, what I do really like is that they had color grading. They didn't have a ton of color grading, but they did have a fair amount of color grading. It feels warmer and more natural than Mean Girls 2024. Mean Girls 2004 has, you know, that good movie feel where everything is like color graded and it's nice and it doesn't feel like sad, which a lot of Mean Girls 2024 has. It's clearly a choice, but it's just a sad choice, and I didn't really enjoy it because they clearly color graded a lot of other things and used incredible lighting for certain scenes and especially the musical numbers. I mean, they really went all out for like at least half of those. And yeah, maybe it wasn't in the budget to color grade the whole movie, but like the non-musical numbers of the movie just for the most part they didn't look very nice. All the lighting was really harsh. And while some lighting is still harsh in the 2004 movie, it is less so because color grading was just a thing that people did more often. And it was just like a nice light color grading along the whole movie that made it feel less like it was filmed by somebody who found out what aperture was 3 days ago. And like just realized what the difference between ISO and f-stop is. Fun fact, f-stop and aperture are the same thing. And that's the norm for movies nowadays. However, 2024 Mean Girls could do that, and they did that in certain scenes. They did that in so many musical scenes where you had this incredible color graded different aperture cinematic moment and like long shots and Why couldn't there be just a tad more color grading in the movie, or like a little bit more effort on not doing like the sad fluorescence? Like, yes, I understand sad fluorescents are part of the public American high school experience. Maybe. I'm not actually sure if all American public high schools have that, but a fair number of them do. There's fluorescents everywhere. My dorm room has a giant fluorescent light that my roommate and I refuse to use, so we just have lamps and stuff. So yeah, that's how it works. Either way, they could have had that same feeling without it. I don't know, just it felt weird and bleached out, especially after you came out of a musical number. And yeah, maybe that's a little bit of the point, but it didn't have to be that extreme. Let me show you an example. This here is a still from a movie my cousin and I shot, just the way that we shot it. This here is when I turned up the saturation a little bit. I didn't even turn up the saturation all that much, but it made an enormous difference based on the shot itself. It's really cool what you can do with just a little bit of color grading. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm going slightly insane because I feel passionate about aspect ratios and color grading. So we've established what I think is really good and really bad in the 2024 Mean Girls. Really good? I like that they were playing around with the aspect ratio. You have the ability to create this really cool art using editing software to change aspect ratio and to make these incredible looking long shots, even if they're not actually long shots. Awesome. Very cool. The things they were doing during certain musical numbers with aspect ratios, changing like the lighting, the color grading. Yeah, the introduction to Regina George, the one at the Halloween party, and revenge party in the hallway. I mean, that I don't think they changed like the lighting that much or the aspect ratio, but I just like the imaginary, like, yay, it's a party. I enjoyed that. Either way, it is something, cool and interesting, and I love that. I just think that like the main body of the movie could have used a little less sadness because the 2004 has all these fluorescence and all that, and it does have a little bit of a warmer, like less icky to look at look to it, and it's not even like extremely color graded. It's just like a tiny bit. Or maybe they were using a different camera, or maybe they were shooting with different aperture and ISO and stuff. But I just feel like sometimes you gotta go back to the old ways and you just gotta make movies look pretty. I want my movies to look pretty. Is that too much to ask for? Now, what I will say, I've spent a lot of time complimenting Mean Girls 2024. Mean Girls 2004, oh my god. What they did an incredible job at, other than the color grading, which was just, a nice touch. Something that was very common at the time that has disappeared throughout time. There's like a YouTube video that keeps being recommended to me that I have yet to watch about color grading, but I'm excited to watch it when I get around to it in like a month. What's really cool about the 2004 Mean Girls is they have like very specific transition editing. And oh my god, the editing is so good. A lot of the editing is so seamless. It feels so smooth that you do realize it's happening, but it's not like really obvious. And I don't really know how else to describe it. There aren't a bunch of movies that I can think of where I'm like, ooh, that edit was really sudden or something like that. Although it does happen sometimes. After Gretchen's speech about Julius Caesar is the fade in to the bathroom, and her head barely like changes at all. I'm assuming it was an overlay and they just managed to figure something out, but the background changes as she like does a different conversation, and it is so good. That's so good. Regina's scream is so good. And just the editing between like cuts, like shot and reverse shot stuff. I love editing so much. I unfortunately just edit on iMovie because I do not have the money to buy like cooler editing software, but iMovie is doing what I need it to do. Anyway, moving on. The last thing I've got to say is that I love like the weird fade through the bathroom door, as it says directed by Mark Waters. And it shows Katie sitting there eating her lunch on the toilet. I don't know. I think that's also great editing. I love when you just go through objects. That's all I have to say on like the visual craft of the movies themselves. Those are the thoughts that I had on the plane. If you're interested in more videos about Mean Girls or more videos about me freaking out about aspect ratios and color grading and what I think is buttery smooth editing, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.